On a windless November evening in 1921, long after dusk had settled over the coconut groves and paddy belts of Malabar, 100 exhausted men, arrested in the aftermath of the anti-colonial uprising, were herded toward an unlit, nondescript goods wagon at the Tirur railway station. The iron shell waited like a trap. Its wooden walls were thick, airless, and blistering from the heat they had absorbed during the day. No provision for ventilation had been made except a shutter meant for loading cargo, not human beings. A rebellion was about to be crushed, and the prisons were overflowing. Most of the rebels were poor Muslims who had been deprived of their traditional land rights by an ignorant British administration that favored rapacious Hindu landlords. Revolts had been recurrent, but reforms were not forthcoming. Tirur jail was overflowing, and nearby prisons were full. The solution? Pack the prisoners into sealed railway wagons and ship them away to the Bellary Central Prison, hundreds of kilometers across the border. The wagon chosen for the task bore the number LV-1711, a vehicle designed for timber and grain, not for human beings. Sergeant Andrews and his colleague Drew were put in charge of the transfer. The wagon was attached to the 77 down train from Kolikot to Coimbatore. At 7:15 p.m., the prisoners, fatigued, beaten, and dehydrated, were pushed inside with no count of how many could safely fit. Even before the train began moving, panic had erupted inside the sealed compartment. The prisoners cried out for air. They hammered on the wooden walls. They shouted to the guards stationed in the adjacent brake van. But Sergeant Andrews dismissed these cries as the noise of rebellious natives. The wagon's sides, built deliberately thick to withstand monsoon moisture and the force of moving cargo, absorbed the heat of trapped human breath. Men fainted. Some collapsed onto others. Their combined weight pressed bodies into corners. The oxygen-starved atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating, and eventually lethal. When the train rolled into Shoranur at 8:40 p.m., the guards posted nearby heard the muffled clamor. They did not open the door. They did not check on the prisoners. They did not loosen a latch. The colonial insistence on discipline over compassion ensured that no protocol existed for such disturbances in a prisoner convoy. By the time the train reached Podanur at 12:30 a.m., silence had fallen inside the wagon, a different kind of silence, one that terrified even the guards. When the bolt was finally slid open, the scene that greeted the railway staff was horrifying. A mound of bodies intertwined, motionless, and gray from suffocation. 56 men were dead. Their eyes were open. Their hands were locked in desperate poses against the walls, the floor, and each other. Some survivors, barely conscious, clawed at the air as if relearning how to breathe. But even then, bureaucracy triumphed over humanity. The 56 corpses were left in the wagon and sent back to Tirur like commodities returned to sender. The 44 survivors were packed into another compartment and transported to Coimbatore. 6 more died on the way. Others succumbed in the hospital over the following week. By the end, the death toll rose to 70. News of the massacre traveled quickly, despite British attempts to censor the regional press. Yet the colonial government had already prepared its narrative. In official telegrams, correspondence, and press notes, the phrase used was train incident. The public was to imagine a mechanical failure or a lapse in railway ventilation, not a human-engineered catastrophe. On November 22nd, the British cabinet convened in London. Their conclusion was predictable. The deaths were the result of overcrowding in a closed luggage van and were regrettable. To convey accountability while avoiding blame, the colonial government ordered a formal inquiry. The committee exonerated the police and railway authorities. The wagon, they claimed, had once been used to transport troops and must therefore have been considered suitable. The traffic inspector who assigned the wagon was named as the technical culprit, not the officers who ignored the prisoners' pleas for air, nor the supervisors who allowed an airtight goods wagon to be used for human transport. Sergeant Andrews, who bore much of the moral weight of the deaths, was briefly charged, but the court promptly acquitted him. The Empire had no guilty conscience. It merely had a public relations problem. Colonial vocabulary is one of the most enduring tools of imperial control. For decades, the deaths of 70 freedom fighters were categorized not as an act of state violence, but as a tragedy, a word that suggests misfortune rather than murder, inevitability rather than agency. School textbooks for long echoed the colonial version, perhaps unwittingly, perhaps deliberately. The turning point in public understanding came slowly but firmly. As regional historians, archivists, and descendants sifted through documents, testimonies, and oral histories, the truth stood stark. The prisoners were not victims of a disaster, but of deliberate disregard. Their deaths were preventable, predictable, and caused by negligence elevated to policy. A tragedy is what nature does. A massacre is what power does. The outrages of the world are too many for us to really care about them all. Our hearts and minds were not designed to handle so great a load, so much death and grief, so many intolerable crimes against humanity. All I ask is that you remember not this or any other massacre, but that the peace and prosperity we enjoy are our shiny surfaces almost always built over deep, dark pits of misery and maleficence. When confronted with their atrocities, the authorities always hide behind their bureaucratic edifices to scapegoat a few weak players while protecting the rich and powerful. The guilty are not punished, but excused, or even rewarded and promoted. The innocent and oppressed are buried and forgotten, or even blamed for foolishly contributing to their own deaths. This is why I believe in God. This is why I believe in a day of reckoning when one who sees and hears all has his say. And this is why I believe in hell.